The October wind cut across the Colorado foothills like a rusty blade, carrying with it the promise of an early winter. Samuel Hartwell straightened his aching back and looked out across his struggling wheat field, watching the golden stalks bend and sway in patterns that spoke of barely adequate rainfall and soil that had seen better years. At 40, Sam had the weathered hands and sun-lined face of a man who had spent half his life fighting the land for every bushel of grain. His farm, if the modest collection of buildings and fenced acres could be called that, sat in a valley between two low hills, 20 miles from the nearest town of Cedar Ridge. It wasn't much to look at: a small log house with a stone chimney, a barn that leaned slightly to the east, and fields that produced just enough to keep him fed and the bank from foreclosing. But it was his, earned through 5 years of backbreaking work after the consumption had taken his wife Mary and their unborn child. In those dark days when grief had nearly destroyed him, the land had been his salvation, something that demanded his attention, his sweat, his complete devotion. It had saved his sanity, if not his prosperity. Sam was loading the last of the day's harvest into his wagon when he saw them, two figures walking along the dusty road that led past his property. Even from a distance he could tell they were in trouble. Their pace was unsteady, exhausted, and the smaller figure, a child, was leaning heavily against the taller one. He set down the grain sack and walked to the edge of his property, shading his eyes against the late afternoon sun. As they drew closer, he could make out more details that made his heart clench with sympathy. The woman was perhaps but tonight, for the first time in years, his house felt alive again. Sam was just drifting off to sleep when he heard it, a soft knock at his bedroom door. He sat up, instantly alert. "Mr. Hartwell?" Grace's voice was quiet, uncertain. I need to talk to you." Sam pulled on his pants and shirt, then opened the door. Grace stood in the hallway, still fully dressed, her face pale in the moonlight streaming through the window. "What is it? Is Emma all right?" "Emma's fine. She's sleeping." Grace wrapped her arms around herself. "Mr. Hartwell, there are things you need to know. About us. About why we're here." Sam could see the fear and determination warring in her expression. Whatever she was about to tell him would change everything. "All right," he said quietly. "Let's talk." Sam led Grace to the kitchen, where he rekindled the fire in the stove and put water on for coffee. The familiar ritual gave them both time to gather their thoughts, though Sam could see that Grace was struggling with whatever she wanted to tell him. "Take your time," he said gently, settling across from her at the table. "Whatever it is, we'll figure it out." Grace stared into her coffee cup for a long moment before speaking. "My husband didn't die in a train accident." Sam kept his expression neutral, waiting for her to continue. "His name was Robert Bennett. He was an accountant for the Kansas Pacific Railroad. A good man, honest, hardworking." Grace's voice grew steadier as she spoke. "Too honest, as it turned out." "What do you mean?" "He discovered that someone was stealing from the railroad, large amounts of money, diverted through false invoices and phantom suppliers. Robert tried to report it through proper channels, but—" Grace's hands tightened around her cup. "The theft went all the way to the top. The men he reported to were the ones behind it." Sam felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October night. "What happened to him?" "They made it look like an accident, a fall from—" "Sam!" Bradley looked up from his desk as Sam entered. "Good to see you. What brings you to town?" "Tom, I need to talk to you about something serious and private." Bradley's expression grew more alert. He was in his 50s, with graying hair, and the kind of steady demeanor that made people trust him instinctively. "Close the door and sit down. What's on your mind?" Sam told him everything. Grace and Emma's arrival, the story about Robert Bennett's death, the stolen railroad documents, and the threats against Grace and her daughter. Bradley listened without interruption, asking only a few clarifying questions. "When Sam finished, Bradley was quiet for a long moment. "That's quite a story, Sam. You believe her?" "Every word." "Tom, you should see Emma. That child has been through hell, and Grace, she's terrified. But she's not lying. Bradley walked to his filing cabinet and pulled out a thick folder. Sam, I got a telegram 3 days ago from the Kansas Pacific Railroad. They're looking for a woman named Grace Bennett and her daughter, wanted for questioning in the theft of company documents and the suspicious death of an employee. Sam felt his blood run cold. They found her. Maybe. Or maybe they're just casting a wide net. Bradley opened the folder and pulled out a telegram. According to this, Robert Bennett was found dead at the bottom of a train platform, apparently having fallen while intoxicated. His widow disappeared the night of his funeral, taking with her several $1,000s in company funds and important documents. That's not what happened, Tom. Grace told me. I know what Grace told you. The question is, which story is true? Bradley leaned back in his chair. Sam, I've learned that the truth usually lies somewhere between what people want you to believe and what actually happened. So what do you suggest? I suggest you bring Mrs. Bennett and her daughter to town. Let me talk to her. Examine these documents she says she has. If she's telling the truth, we'll find a way to protect her and get the evidence to the right people. If she's lying, she's not lying, Sam said firmly. Maybe not. But Sam, even if every word she's told you is true, you're harboring a woman who's wanted by the railroad. That makes you an accessory after the fact. If this goes wrong, you could lose everything. Sam thought about his farm, his careful, quiet life, the security he'd built for himself over 5 years of hard work. Then he thought about Grace's frightened eyes and Emma's silent watchfulness. Tom, some things are more important than security. Bradley studied his friend. Sam's rifle cracked once, and the gunman toppled from his saddle with a cry of pain and rage. The sound echoed through the canyon like thunder, and immediately Sam heard the other 2 men shouting and urging their horses toward the gunfire. Sam was already moving, using the rocks and shadows to mask his position. Above him, he could hear Grace and Emma running along the canyon path. They had understood his signal and were heading for town. Miller, one of the remaining men called. Miller, you all right? Sam heard a groan from the direction where the gunman had fallen. Good. Wounded, not dead. He wasn't a killer by nature, despite what the war had taught him about necessity. He's up in the rocks. Miller's voice came weakly. Farmer's got a rifle. The well-dressed man's voice cut through the night. Mr. Hartwell, I know you can hear me. We don't want to hurt you, but we will if necessary. All we want is the woman and the documents she stole. Sam didn't bother to reply. He was working his way along the ridge, trying to stay ahead of the men who were now climbing toward his position on foot. You're protecting a thief and a murderer, Mr. Hartwell, the voice continued. Mrs. Bennett killed her husband for insurance money and stole those documents to cover her tracks. Is that the kind of woman worth dying for? The words hit Sam like physical blows. Was it possible? Could Grace have been lying about everything? But then he remembered Emma's frightened eyes, Grace's genuine terror when she'd told him about the men searching her house. Whatever the truth was, he was committed now. A rifle shot rang out, and rock chips flew from the boulder beside Sam's head. They had spotted him. Time to even the odds. Sam worked his way to a position where he could see both remaining men clearly. The well-dressed man was directing his companion, a stocky gunfighter who moved with professional competence. Last chance, Hartwell, the leader called. Walk away now and nobody else gets hurt. Sam's answer was a rifle shot that sent the leader diving for cover behind a fallen log. The message was clear. There would be no surrender. The gunfight that followed was brief but intense. 2 men with pistols against 1 man with a rifle and intimate knowledge of the terrain. In the end, it wasn't much of a contest. When the echoes of the final gunshot faded away, Sam stood alone among the rocks, breathing hard and shaking slightly from the aftermath of violence. 2 men lay motionless in the canyon below, while the wounded Miller had apparently managed to crawl away into the darkness. Sam checked the bodies quickly, finding little except weapons and a telegram that confirmed what the leader had said about a reward for Grace and Emma. But there was something else, a railroad pass made out to J. Morrison, special investigator. So these men weren't just hired killers, they were railroad agents, which meant the corruption Grace had described went even deeper than she'd known. By the time Sam reached Cedar Ridge, dawn was breaking over the mountains and he was exhausted. He found Grace and Emma in the sheriff's office, both safe but pale with worry. "Sam!" Grace ran to him, not caring who saw her relief. "Thank God you're safe. We heard the gunshots." "It's over," Sam said, pulling her close while Emma hugged his legs. "For now." Sheriff Bradley looked up from the documents spread across his desk, the papers Grace had carried from Kansas. His expression was grim. "Sam, we need to talk. These documents, they're not just about railroad theft. They're about murder, conspiracy, and corruption that reaches all the way to Washington." Sheriff Bradley's office felt smaller, with 3 adults and 1 child crowded around his desk, studying the documents that had cost Robert Bennett his life. The papers were more damning than even Grace had realized. "Your husband wasn't just an accountant," Bradley said to Grace. "According to these records, he was working undercover for the federal government, investigating corruption in the Kansas Pacific Railroad." Grace's face went white. "That's impossible. Robert never told me. He couldn't tell you. Look at this." Bradley held up a letter bearing an official government seal. Robert Bennett was a Treasury agent, assigned to gather evidence against a conspiracy that involves railroad executives, territorial politicians, and federal officials. Sam studied the documents over Bradley's shoulder. "What kind of conspiracy?" "Land fraud, mostly. The railroad was supposed to sell government-granted land to settlers at fair prices. Instead, they've been selling it to speculators and foreign investors at inflated rates, then pocketing the difference. We're talking about millions of acres and millions of dollars." "But why kill Robert?" Grace asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why not just transfer him or buy him off?" Bradley pointed to another document. "Because he had discovered the identity of the conspiracy's leader. Grace, your husband died because he learned that the scheme goes all the way to the Secretary of the Interior." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't just about railroad corruption. It was about a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of the federal government. "The men who came after us," Sam said slowly, "they weren't just railroad agents. No. According to the telegram I found on their leader, they were federal marshals operating under special authority from Washington." Bradley's expression was grim. "Which means we're not just dealing with criminals, we're dealing with the law itself." Emma, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, suddenly tugged at her mother's sleeve and whispered something urgent. "What did she say?" Sam asked. Grace's face went pale. "She said there are more men coming. She can see them from the window." Bradley moved to the window and peered out through the curtains. 6 riders, coming down Main Street. They're not locals." Sam checked his rifle. "Same men who attacked the farm?" "No, these are different. Better dressed, better armed." Bradley turned back to the room. "Grace, is there anything else your husband might have hidden? Any other evidence?" I don't know. Robert said the documents in the packet were everything, but..." Grace paused, thinking. "There was something he said the night before he died. Something about insurance being hidden where only I would think to look." "What did he mean?" "I don't know. We had so little time together at the end. He was working late every night, coming home exhausted and frightened. I thought he was just worried about his job." The sound of boots on the wooden sidewalk outside made everyone freeze. Through the window they could see the 6 riders dismounting in front of the sheriff's office. "Back door," Bradley said quietly. "There's a passage that leads to the church basement. You can hide there while I deal with these men." "Tom, they're federal marshals," Sam protested. "You can't just watch me." Bradley opened his desk drawer and pulled out a badge that Sam had never seen before. A silver star marked U.S. Marshal. "Tom," Sam said slowly, "what aren't you telling us?" "I'm telling you that Robert Bennett wasn't the only federal agent investigating this conspiracy. I've been working this case for 2 years, waiting for someone to gather enough evidence to make arrests." Grace stared at him in shock. "You knew? You knew about Robert?" "I knew there was an agent in Kansas, but I didn't know his identity until yesterday when I sent a telegram to Washington." "Grace, your husband was a hero. And now his evidence is going to bring down one of the largest corruption schemes in territorial history. A loud knock echoed through the office. "Sheriff Bradley, open up! Federal business!" "Go," Bradley whispered urgently. "Take the documents and get to the church. Whatever happens, don't let them get those papers." As Sam led Grace and Emma toward the back door, he heard Bradley calling out to the men outside. "Just a minute, let me get dressed." The church basement was dark and cold, filled with supplies for winter charity drives and old furniture that had seen better days. Sam positioned Grace and Emma behind a stack of crates while he watched the basement window that looked out onto Main Street. Through the glass, he could see the confrontation unfolding at the sheriff's office. The 6 men had surrounded the building, and their leader, a tall man in an expensive coat, was gesturing angrily at Bradley. "What are they saying?" Grace whispered. "I can't hear from here, but it doesn't look friendly." Emma tugged at Sam's sleeve and pointed toward the back of the basement. When he looked where she was indicating, he saw a narrow staircase leading up to what must be the church proper. "Good thinking, Emma. If they search down here, we'll have another way out." They waited in tense silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then they heard it, the sound of the sheriff's office door being forced open, followed by shouting and the crash of overturned furniture. "They're searching the office," Sam whispered. "It won't take them long to figure out we're not there." Grace clutched the document packet to her chest. "Sam, if they catch us..." "They won't catch us." "Emma, you said your father mentioned insurance hidden where only your mother would think to look. Any ideas what he might have meant?" Emma whispered, something to Grace, who suddenly looked stricken. "Oh my God, I think I know." "What?" "Our wedding picture. Robert always said it was our insurance against loneliness." Grace's hands trembled as she reached into her carpet bag and pulled out a small framed photograph. "He said only I would understand what he meant." She turned the frame over and carefully pried off the backing. Hidden behind their wedding photograph was a single sheet of paper covered in Robert's careful handwriting. "It's a list," Grace breathed. "Names, dates, amounts. Sam, this is evidence of payments to government officials, including..." She stopped, her face going white. "Including who?" "Including Sheriff Tom Bradley. $5,000 received last month." The basement door burst open and Bradley himself appeared at the top of the stairs, his badge glinting in the lamplight. "I'm sorry, folks," he said quietly, a gun in his hand. "But I'm afraid this is where your run ends." Sam felt the world tilt beneath his feet as Sheriff Bradley descended the basement stairs, his weapon trained on the 3 fugitives. Behind him came the tall man in the expensive coat, flanked by 2 armed deputies. "Sheriff," Sam said carefully. "What's going on here?" "What's going on, Sam, is that you've been harboring federal fugitives and interfering with a government investigation." Bradley's voice was steady, but Sam could see regret in his eyes. "I'm sorry it came to this." The tall man stepped forward. "I'm Deputy Marshal James Morrison. Mrs. Bennett, you're under arrest for the murder of your husband and the theft of federal documents." "Murder?" Grace's voice cracked. "I didn't murder anyone. The evidence says otherwise." Morrison nodded to one of his men, who pulled out a pair of handcuffs. "Robert Bennett died of arsenic poisoning, not from falling off a train platform. The insurance investigation found traces of the poison in his coffee cup, coffee that only you had access to." Sam felt Grace sag against him. "That's impossible," she whispered. "I loved Robert. I would never..." "You loved his insurance money," Morrison interrupted. $50,000, paid out within days of his death. More than enough to disappear and start a new life. "The insurance money went to pay Robert's debts," Grace protested. "There was barely enough left to buy train tickets." "Then where did the money come from for your expensive travels, the hotels, the clothes, the..." "What hotels? What clothes?" Grace gestured at her worn traveling dress. "We've been sleeping in barns and eating scraps for 2 weeks." Morrison exchanged glances with Bradley. "Ma'am, according to our investigation, you've been living quite comfortably since leaving Kansas. First-class train compartments, expensive hotels in Denver and Colorado Springs. We've never been to Denver or Colorado Springs. Grace's voice rose with desperation. We came straight here from Kansas, traveling on back roads and sleeping rough. Sam studied Morrison's face and saw something that made his blood run cold. The man genuinely believed what he was saying. Someone had fed him false information, created a false trail of evidence that painted Grace as a murderer and a thief. Marshall Morrison, Sam said carefully. Has anyone shown you physical proof of these hotel stays? Witnesses who actually saw Mrs. Bennett? The evidence has been verified by federal investigators. What investigators? The same ones who told you Robert Bennett fell from a train platform instead of being poisoned? Morrison's confidence wavered, slightly. Mr. Hartwell, I understand your desire to protect Mrs. Bennett, but the facts are clear. Are they? Sam pulled the hidden list from Grace's hands and held it up. Marshall, do you recognize any of the names on this list? Morrison glanced at the paper and his face went white. Where did you get that? From Robert Bennett's real insurance policy, hidden where only his wife would think to look. Sam's voice grew harder. Marshall, I think you need to take a closer look at who's been feeding you information about this case. Bradley stepped forward, his gun still trained on Sam. That's enough. Morrison, we need to get these people to a secure location. Tom, Sam said quietly, how much did they pay you? I don't know what you're talking about. Sam pointed to Bradley's name on the list. $5,000 last month. What did you have to do to earn it? For a moment, Bradley's composure cracked, and Sam saw the shame and fear beneath his professional facade. Sam, you don't understand. These people, they don't give you choices. They make offers you can't refuse. There's always a choice, Tom. Is there? When they threaten your sister's family in Denver? When they know where your nephews go to school? Bradley's voice grew bitter. They didn't want me to be corrupt, Sam. They just wanted me to be cooperative. Morrison was staring at the list in Sam's hands, his face growing paler as he read the names. This can't be right. These are federal officials, territorial governors. People who have been taking money to look the other way while millions of acres of public land are stolen, Sam confirmed. Marshall, I think you've been investigating the wrong crime. No. Morrison shook his head. No, the evidence is clear. Mrs. Bennett murdered her husband. Mrs. Bennett's husband was murdered by the same people who are paying everyone on that list, Sam interrupted. The question is, Marshall, are you going to help them cover it up? The basement fell silent except for the sound of Emma's quiet breathing. The child had pressed herself against her mother's side, but her eyes were alert, watching every face. Morrison looked around the room, at Bradley's shame-faced expression, at Grace's desperate hope, at the damning list in Sam's hands. If this is true, if Robert Bennett was really working for the Treasury Department, then his widow and daughter are witnesses to be protected, not criminals to be arrested, Sam finished. But the evidence was manufactured by the same people who killed her husband. Sam held out the list. Marshall, you have a choice to make. You can arrest an innocent woman and help cover up the biggest land fraud in territorial history, or you can do your job and protect the witnesses who can expose it. Morrison stared at the paper for a long moment, then slowly holstered his weapon. Sheriff Bradley, I'm placing you under arrest for conspiracy and accepting bribes. Marshall, Bradley started to protest. Tom, don't make this harder than it has to be. Morrison turned to his deputies. Secure the sheriff's weapon and escort him to the jail. As Bradley was led away, Morrison turned back to Sam and Grace. Mrs. Bennett, I owe you an apology. It appears I've been given false information about your case. Then you believe me? Grace asked hopefully. I'm beginning to. But we're going to need more than this list to bring down a conspiracy this large. Morrison studied the document again. Mrs. Bennett, did your husband hide anything else? Any other evidence? Grace shook her head. If he did, I don't know about it. Emma tugged at her mother's sleeve and whispered something urgent. What did she say? Morrison asked. Grace looked puzzled. She said Papa had a second name. I don't know what she means. Sam knelt down to Emma's level. Emma, what do you mean about your papa having a second name? Emma whispered something to her mother, who gasped. She says Robert told her he had a work name and a home name, and that his work name was written in the big book. What big book? Morrison asked. I don't know. Grace looked at her daughter. Emma. What big book? Emma pointed toward the church. Stairs above them, then made a gesture like she was writing. The church registry, Sam realized. Emma, did your papa write something in the church book upstairs? Emma nodded vigorously. Morrison was already heading for the stairs. Let's go take a look. What they found in the church registry would change everything and put all their lives in even greater danger. The Reverend Murphy's old church registry was kept in a glass case near the altar, its leather-bound pages containing decades of baptisms, marriages, and burials in Cedar Ridge. Emma led them directly to a page near the back, pointing to an entry that looked like all the others. But when Morrison examined it closely, he saw what the child had noticed. The handwriting was different from the Reverend's careful script. Here, Morrison read aloud. Joseph Richardson arrived from Kansas seeking God's protection for his family. It's dated 3 weeks ago. Joseph Richardson was Robert's mother's maiden name, Grace said quietly. He must have stopped here on his way to wherever he was going. Sam studied the entry. Grace, Robert was supposed to be dead 3 weeks ago. If he wrote this, then he's alive, Grace finished, her voice barely a whisper. Morrison was examining the page more carefully. There's something else. Look at the way certain letters are darker than others. Sam leaned closer and saw what Morrison meant. Scattered throughout the entry, certain letters had been traced over, making them stand out slightly from the rest. It's a code, Morrison realized. If you read just the darkened letters, hidden in the mine shaft, Devils, Canyon, Colorado, evidence of everything. Trust no one in government except Morrison. That's my name. Grace sank into a nearby pew, overwhelmed. Robert's alive. My husband is alive. But in hiding, Sam pointed out. And if he doesn't trust anyone in government except Morrison, that means he knows how deep this conspiracy goes. Morrison was already moving toward the door. We need to get to Devil's Canyon. If Robert Bennett is there with evidence of this corruption. The sound of approaching horses cut him off. Through the church windows they could see more riders coming down Main Street, at least a dozen men heavily armed. Morrison's taking too long, one of the riders called out. Go check the church. Sam grabbed his rifle. They followed you here. No, Morrison said grimly. I sent a telegram to my superiors in Denver telling them about the new evidence. Someone in the federal office warned them. How deep does this go? Grace asked. Deep enough that we can't trust anyone. Morrison checked. His weapon. There's a back door to this church? Through the vestry, Sam confirmed. But where can we go? They'll have the whole town surrounded. Emma tugged at her mother's sleeve and whispered something urgent. She says there's another way, Grace translated. A cave behind the church that connects to the old mine workings. Sam stared at the child. Emma, how do you know about caves? Emma pointed to herself, then made a gesture of exploring. She's been exploring while we've been talking, Grace realized. Emma, can you show us? The sound of boots on the church steps made the decision for them. Emma led them quickly through the vestry to a small door that Sam had never noticed before. Behind it, a narrow tunnel had been carved into the rock, probably an old escape route from the days when the church had doubled as a fort during Indian raids. They crawled through the tunnel in single file, with Emma leading the way with the confidence of someone who had mapped every inch of the passage. Behind them, they could hear the sounds of the church being searched. The tunnel emerged in a natural cave about 50 yards behind the church, hidden by scrub brush and fallen rocks. From here, they could see the town spread out below them, with armed men moving systematically through every building. We can't stay here, Morrison said. They'll find this cave eventually. Devil's Canyon is 2 days' ride north, Sam said. We'll need horses, supplies, and we'll need to avoid every road between here and there, Morrison added. These men have resources, connections. They can track us anywhere we might normally go. Grace was holding Emma close, but the child seemed remarkably calm for someone who had just discovered her father might be alive. Emma, Grace said softly. Are you all right? Emma nodded, then whispered something that made Grace's eyes widen. What did she say? Sam asked. She said Papa told her this might happen. He taught her how to find him if the bad men came. Morrison leaned forward intently. What did he teach her? Emma whispered to her mother again, and Grace translated. He said to follow the old mining trail north but stay off the main path. Look for 3 rocks shaped like a cross. Papa will be waiting. How does she know all this? Sam asked, amazed. Robert spent a lot of time with Emma in the months before he supposedly died, Grace explained. I thought he was just trying to be a good father, spending time with her before his work got too dangerous. Now I realize he was preparing her. Morrison checked his ammunition. It sounds like Robert Bennett thought of everything except trusting the right people in government. A shout from below made them all freeze. One of the searchers had found the tunnel entrance. Time to go, Sam said grimly. They made their way deeper into the cave system, following passages that seemed to extend for miles through the mountain. Emma led them with the confidence of someone who had explored these tunnels before, taking turns that seemed random, but always led upward, toward the surface. After an hour of crawling and climbing, they emerged onto a mountain slope far above, Cedar Ridge. The town looked small and distant below them, with the riders still moving through the streets like ants. Now what? Grace asked. Sam pointed north, toward the snow-capped peaks that marked the beginning of the high country. Now we find out if your husband is as clever as he seems to be. And if he's not, then we're all dead, Morrison said bluntly. Because those men down there won't stop hunting us until we're silenced permanently. As they began the dangerous journey toward Devil's Canyon, none of them could have predicted what they would find there, or the final confrontation that would determine not just their own fate, but the future of the entire territory. The conspiracy that had started with railroad corruption had grown into something much larger and more dangerous. And somewhere in the mountains ahead, Robert Bennett was waiting with evidence that could bring down some of the most powerful men in America. If they could reach him before the hunters found them all. Emma took her mother's hand and pointed toward the northern peaks, her young face filled with a determination that reminded Sam of her father. For the first time since this all began, the child spoke aloud, "Papa's waiting." And with those 2 words, the final phase of their journey began.